So let's move on to distributive creativity and find out what that means. This panel is chaired by Josh Rizzo. Josh is the Vice President of Technology at Hula Post Productions. Josh started working in IT in his teens, which seems to be a common theme these days. But then he went to film school and, like all good students of motion picture, moved to Los Angeles, where he found himself at the confluence of IT and making movies at a most opportune time. So please welcome Josh and Distributed Creativity.
Good morning. Good morning. There we go. Well, thank you. As you know, I'm Josh Rizzo. I'm going to introduce the panel after this first primer. We're going to have some fun this morning, hopefully. I'm going to go through some things that we already know, how we got here, where we are, and we have a working crystal ball in the room, so we're going to figure out where we're going. We can put up the first slide if you like. We are channeling Stanley Kubrick. My subtitle is How I Learned How to Stop Worrying and Love the Cloud. So the question is, how will the adoption of cloud-based technology impact our media industry? Well, again, we're going to refer to the crystal ball, and we're going to first define what cloud means. Now, you all have probably been aching to get a definition for that because it's jargon. It's meant so many things for so long. It's a marketing term. It can mean a web browser app. It could mean a tool inside of a company. But at the end of the day, it usually meant a network connected to a cumulus-like thing that represented the internet and almost always meant the other, the thing we cannot control. Don't put your stuff there because we don't know what's going on. And it is much the bane of IT administrators everywhere. So is it secure? Is it practical? Can we use it? Well, we'll answer those questions. Again, for many years it's been don't use the cloud, don't touch it. Well, how does that work now that the marketing term is flipped and we're putting everything in the cloud? We put our finances in the cloud. We put our media in the cloud. We put our home photos in the cloud. So let's redefine cloud as an access term, a software tool or application that may be built upon shared or dedicated resources, which may be accessed via private or public network. Ugh, that sounds like more jargon, and I don't think we're going to make a bumper sticker out of that anytime soon. But it's better than nothing. As a technology, I want to redefine the cloud as an infinitely scalable, software-defined infrastructure that has fault tolerance and security implemented at every level. Now, if you think about that, and you think about that in the context of the tools you use today, how many of you can identify that that's what you're using? Then you're not using the cloud. So what does that mean? It means that the cloud, as we define it now, is a combination of storage, compute, and networking that you can then build apps upon. Now, yes, a computer or workstation has storage, it has memory, it has compute power, but now we're talking scalable beyond anything we've had as humans to date. Now, a lot of companies are building apps in the cloud, and some companies, their job is to build and maintain the cloud. This is not a cloud. This may more reflect what we're used to seeing in a server room somewhere, but I assure you that is not the cloud. What the cloud is, again, is intellectual superclay. It is the thing that we have not had this yet as a race, as a species. It is the most advanced tool that we have developed to date. Tangent, Steve Jobs reference, obligatory. There was a quote that Steve Jobs made in the late 90s when discussing an analog of locomotion in animals, and humans were really crappy at it, whereas like the condor was the best. And he said, but if you introduce the idea that we can build a machine, that machine might be a bicycle, we then excel. So computers are a bicycle for the mind. If that's the case, the cloud is a jetliner. It carries more of us farther and faster. So what do we do with this? Well, we make cat videos, and we put them on and we share them. So the important point here is to define that the cloud is not just for putting existing tools in and making an analog transfer of we're going to take what we have today and we're going to put it in the cloud, but rather it is an opportunity to redefine how we build tools in a way that utilizes the full potential of the system. So as an idealized, overly simplified expression, this is our industry is moving from expression to experience. You've heard this said before, and it's important to remember that basically everything else we have done is not necessary, but we have decided it to be needed. I mean, we literally have said, well, based on what we know, based on the technology we have, we feel the problem of solving the communication of the expression to the experience can be done X, Y, Z. It's, again, our own making. So another quote, Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not magic. That's a Rube Goldberg-like device of misery that we have really created a maze for ourselves to try to get from expression to experience. But there's a reason why, and I think we know that, and that's what we're here to talk about. We are two industries converged. We have 100 years of filmmaking, asked to trust 60 years of IT in a 10-year time span, give or take. There's going to be some collateral damage. This is not based on real data. This is a projection of my belief, and it's actually algorithmic. But the idea is cinema was top dog for a long time. We had no better technology and no better way to create images and communicate this expression. Then behind that was broadcast, not too far, depending on your perspective. And then after that was IT. Late to the game, couldn't really do much. You know, downloading videos on the internet was whatever. But I want to, again, redefine. This today is our 1984 in the context of cloud technology. This is the beginning. When the Macintosh came out, it was a graphical user interface. People were using non-graphical computers. They're like, what's this expensive anomaly? I don't get what this is for. I really just don't get it yet. We're good doing our business the way we're doing it. Thank you. But this opened up a whole new way to think about programming, to think about experience and building tools. And it's a real science. So there is a bit of a tragedy that's a whole panel in and of itself that, you know, one of the biggest growth sectors in jobs is computer science and programming, yet it is tragically under-taught in schools and in higher education. But you can't just wake up on a Thursday and say, I'm going to build a cloud. Today we're going to build a cloud. It doesn't happen that way. It takes time, planning, and a team of experts. So we have to then redefine how to get from A to B in the context of this new super tool. And what does that mean for post? Definitely panelists are going to talk more about that. But we have an opportunity now that post can redefine itself as a collection of talent backed by engineers and architects. Talent. It's still going to be about story and it's still going to be about talent, but the way we get from A to B is going to change, and it is changing as we know. The repercussions we all kind of know, and we're not going to say those words. Last point is about trust. Anything that can be built can be hacked. Anything that can be built can be hacked. If you, I followed some of the Department of Defense blogs when they have a big defense con out here in Vegas. They actually had a room just like this where on the other side of the wall there was a team of people scanning and hacking people's personal devices and then putting their information up on the screens as shame. Because there's people smart enough to do that as a hobby. So understand that the cloud is not less secure, it is more secure. A, because it is a broader team of people working on solving the problem of security. And B, it's a combination that keeps changing. You put things on a disk, they will get hacked. So the questions should turn from, is it secure, to what methodologies are being used to evaluate security, from how do we control it, to what have we done to ensure that the input and output of the media reflects our business processes. This is now up to us. We are not patrons at a restaurant, but we are also the owner, the chef, and everything in between. The last point is trust. It really is going to take trust, because the concepts that are going to be building the cloud are as complex or more complex than we've ever experienced in even filmmaking. And I want to say that, not to discredit how complex developing and processing a photographic image was, and all of that wonderful science that goes into that, but this is a different science, and it is as, if not more, complex. And like with all things, we do have to stop worrying and just start to love the cloud. So, with that, first presenter is Rami Katrib from Digital Film Tree. Second, Matt Schneider, Joe Byrne, and I'm just up there for the sake of it. So, here we go. Gentlemen, if you want to come on up. Sure.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, actually, one day we woke up and we decided to build a cloud. I was going to focus on one little aspect of what we're doing in terms of cloud building. And I wanted to talk about OpenStack. Just out of curiosity, how many people in the room are familiar with OpenStack? It's about 50% of the room. How many people are actively deploying OpenStack instances? Looks like about 10 people. Well, I was going to focus on what we've been doing for the last 6 months. And I have to say, I first learned about OpenStack because one of our computer programmers mentioned it one day, and I said, "What's that?" And we started to research it. And the more we learned about it, the more, I would say, it enthralled us. Because the last 10 years, I would characterize as file-based workflows. We've been endeavoring on file-based workflows. And that took quite a while to infiltrate the industry. I remember in the early days, the biggest challenge was simply explaining it to someone. You know, the non-linearity of things, the fact that you can do multiple things at the same time. And, you know, I dare say today there's not much debate about file-based workflows. It's permeated our entire industry. All the camera manufacturers are file-based, and tape is kind of on its last legs. And then along comes OpenStack, which essentially, for those that don't know, is an open source cloud building technology that was born at NASA with the support of a company called Rackspace. And as Josh was saying, OpenStack for us is the ability to store, compute, and network in the same place. It's kind of like when we used to explain to people, you can actually do color correction, online, and visual effects at the same time. You don't have to physically move from one room to another room to start another activity. And once they started understanding that, they started to exploit it. And that's when efficiencies were gained. So OpenStack is kind of like Amazon and Windows, but we think it's a lot cooler. It's hardware agnostic, and it's software-defined post. It's highly scalable. We haven't even begun to reach the limits in terms of scaling. And I also wanted to talk about the notion of hybridization, the idea of building a private cloud and a public cloud and connecting it. There's no vendor lock-in. And currently there's about 200 companies that all contribute to the OpenStack Foundation. My first visit to the OpenStack community was in Hong Kong a couple months ago. And it was really, really revealing. So basically you have all these companies like IBM, HP, VMware, Oracle, and they get together and they discuss and debate and argue even on the roadmap of OpenStack. And I have to say some of those meetings, you know, the people are just in vehement disagreement, right, about the different components of the OpenStack architecture. And I was thinking about, you know, how we communicate with our colleagues in Hollywood and seeing these companies that compete against each other, but then utilize the technology for their own products. And I started using the word co-opetition. You know, they're highly competitive, but they benefit from the same technology. And they have these debates where it just seemed like massive disagreements, but that was the status quo. That's how they communicated. For us, the cloud became a necessity because of the amount of data that our shows are generating on a daily basis. Just one of our shows uses over 20 cameras, and it's just a deluge of data, just an orgy of imaging. And it's not going to change, right? There's cameras set up in every single location, and every night you have to process all that. So our layout looked like post-production, visual effects, sound facility, archiving, and distribution. But practically speaking, there were disconnects at every point. A 100 terabytes a day is a common, it's just a very common amount of data to be incoming every day. Client demand, when we would pitch the idea of building OpenStack instances, a lot of it had to do with explaining to our clients what that meant. One of the biggest advantages that we've been able to realize is when you build a cloud instance, we would encourage our clients to aggregate all their metadata to one location, even before we know how we were going to benefit from that. Just grab it, right? So we were putting all the camera negative, camera reports, sound reports, call sheets, and put them in the same location. And at that point in time, you can start to come up with strategies in terms of how to connect the dots and how to benefit from having all the metadata in the same location. And it's something that we characterize as the living archive. The file is a living organism. It builds a community with other files. You start to make associations. Essentially, within the cloud, the files can preserve themselves. And when you build one cloud, you can essentially have it constantly syncing with another cloud in another location. So our current proof of concept is we have a couple TV shows where we built an OpenStack that's associated or connected to the editorial. Every day, everything that's generated is stored on that OpenStack. At the same time, we have another OpenStack at the facility. And the two clouds are constantly talking to each other. Essentially, they're trickling information back and forth. And even though we don't have a very high bandwidth internet line, everything is automatically replicated, just as a matter of fact. And eventually, the idea is to have another OpenStack at the studio. So in terms of remote production everywhere, the vision looks like I have an OpenStack in New York. I have an OpenStack in Los Angeles. I have one at the studio. I have one at the facility, and they're all talking to each other. And one stack basically can encapsulate the entirety of all the data that a show would generate. And you can make decisions in terms of what you're going to delete or what you're going to keep open-endedly. Now, the cost is another, amazing reality. We can build 100 terabytes, for under $10,000. So it starts to be really compelling that I can build 3 or 4 of these and connect them to each other and start to build policies in terms of automation. You could allow certain departments access, whether it's visual effects or the studio promo departments, and I characterize it to an enterprise Dropbox, right, just for that show. So one storage, one archive. Instantaneous and controlled access. We basically get our cues from our contact at the studio in terms of who's a vetted provider or vendor who can have access to the files. Compute is, as Josh was saying, compute is storage and storage is compute. We have to start thinking of those as the same thing, not separate systems. Metadata adoptions preserved from productions to archive. There's metadata for every aspect of production. Now we can start to define that for each department by direct interaction with the script supervisors, the people that fill out the camera reports, sound reports, and start to build intelligence in the cloud, in the database. We could also learn things about the metadata once it's in the same place. As I mentioned, lower than tape, cost is lower than tape, and there's a new path to monetization by virtue of having all the metadata in the same location. And it's a complement to very long-term archival. What we're telling our clients is once you aggregate the metadata, keep it there open-endedly. It doesn't have to be shut off or deleted. Thank you.
Let me get you ready. Let me get you ready.
All right.
So as I'm getting this ready, Rami, real quick, when you woke up on that Thursday and decided to build the cloud, about how long did it take? About a year, okay. And who's the guy that had the idea to build it? Well, team.
Our CTO, Guillaume Aubuchon, basically started researching it, and we started doing prototypes at the facility. And then we started experimenting with some of our clients that were ambitious enough to do so.
So they waked up and decided, computer programmers, about a year. Again, it definitely is a science and certainly a job in and of itself. Mr. Schneider?
Josh, morning. So we've talked about the cloud tool sets and cloud concepts for a long time. Longer, in fact, that the branding now known as cloud has been around. And even early on, we had a sneaky sense of the possibility that this kind of collaboration might, in fact, one day have an impact on the post business, and more specifically, on post facilities. Post facilities are really amazing places when you think about it. It's a collection of sophisticated tools and talented people to use them. But paradoxically, a post facility relies on a client's dependencies to exist. Inevitably, a facility, especially a large facility, has to have more tools and more technical smarts than what the client has on their own in order to remain appealing to the client, no matter what kind of content is being created. But what happens when various evolutionary patterns settle in? Technology becomes more affordable, clientele become more informed, and ultimately, when some of the most expensive aspects of our process, the storage, the networking, the infrastructure, and ultimately the front-end applications, what happens when all of that becomes centralized? Thus, when thinking about cloud systems and cloud toolsets, we're faced with the ironic duality of what the client really is. We have clients, the humankind, for whom we bleed daily, and then there is the software client, the technical entity that we provide as a tool ultimately to the human client. The first half of the story revolves around how we provide the best possible tool set to our clients so they can do the work that they need to do in the best possible way, and hopefully within the budgetary framework that they need. The second half of the story is about how the growing sophistication of the client tool set, which encompasses software, internet protocol, cloud, may strangely, ironically, contribute to our inability to retain our clients despite years of earning their loyalty. Although this is a worry, it's not a worry fully realized. Technicolor Postworks in New York, for example, has probably over 150 editing rooms, studios, mix rooms, color grading suites, and DI theaters across our 3 locations in New York, and those rooms are far from empty. But it is true that a certain migration has occurred over the last several years of clients, meaning the humankind, who wish to leave the womb of the facility, set up their own location, and start to look for more cost-effective ways of doing what we do in larger facility environments. This has happened across the board in all segments of post-production, including feature film and scripted television. But the loudest change has taken place in the unscripted nonfiction world, a world that has encompasses both science and nature and reality television. The cloud phenomenon may have been on the horizon anyway, but it wasn't the motivating factor for some of these clients to leave the comfort and the safety of the large facility staffed 24/7, 365 with a rich saturation of talent and technology. There have been, however, notable industry trends that we've all felt that led the way in terms of clients concerning what it would mean to work more independently. Now, it is our belief that this need to be more independent, more self-reliant, and ultimately to save money that has opened the door to enormous technological necessities that have ultimately contributed to cloud development and cloud tools. Here are some of the industry trends that we have experienced in New York that I am sure will be familiar to everyone in this room. Overall, the cost of equipment has plunged. The nonlinear editor, for example, previously $100,000 is now 99% off. Or is this, I'm sure you remember this advertisement, the $50,000 editing system, now 90% off. The cost of storage has dropped too. In the last 10 years, has seen a much greater proliferation of high-performance SANs for film and TV editorial. The rise of lower-cost, compressed HD, file-based cameras have meant that more clients are buying their own camera systems rather than renting it from a rental house. Conventional computer technology has replaced video systems. Hard drives now act as tapes and tape machines. And natural disaster struck Japan in March of 2011, greatly affecting the supply of videotape and thus contributing to a speedier transition to file-based workflows. High-end color grading and imaging tools are now much more accessible. Obviously, I'm talking about tools like Teranex and Resolve, but there are many platforms like them. So at this point, we have this scenario where clients can now bind their own camera systems, their own editorial systems, their own grading systems, basically develop their own facilities. Perhaps the greatest groan heard in the hallways is about the drop in network fees. Fees paid to production companies for their original content. These factors certainly contribute to a sense of greater independence for clients and made it possible for some, but not all clients, to create their own mini facilities, custom tailored to just the needs of their own content, rather than renting services from large facilities that were pan-engineered to accommodate many clients and many workflows. But beyond this, what has really contributed to the interest in a cloud toolset more than anything else? And does this perhaps ironically favor large facilities after all, despite any diaspora that may have already occurred with some of the clients? Enter the modern age of the shooting ratio. We have seen shooting ratios skyrocket to proportions never before seen. One such client at Postworks New York shot an extraordinary 4,300 hours of footage for 8 44-minute shows. Do the math and you get a shooting ratio of over 700 to 1. And they took full advantage of the industry trend to more cinema-like workflows as the show was shot in 24p, cut in 24p, mastered in 24p, and distributed to other formats from that 24p master, just like their filmmaker cousins. To put this into greater perspective, our client shot 4,300 hours of footage on Canon C300s and a Canon XF 50 megabit 422 codec. So what does that mean? That means over 100 terabytes of camera original data. It also means that the time of ingest to create editorial proxies was roughly 2,100 hours in aggregate. This translates into 268 8-hour shifts, or 134 business days, assuming 2 8-hour shifts per day. We work much more than that, by the way. These are small numbers. 134 business days, assuming 2 8-hour shifts a day, and ultimately this means 27 weeks, or about 6 months in aggregate, to create the editorial proxies. Obviously, in this scenario, that amount of aggregate time is greatly reduced by multiple nodes and widening the pipe and so on. These same editorial proxies consumed 21 terabytes of editorial shared storage. That's just for the proxy. And lest we forget, those 4,300 hours of footage still needed to be logged, transcribed, and organized. All this for 8 44-minute episodes. So from this kind of story, one can see how something much more distributed, much wider as far as access points, much greater in computational go power, would provide the greatest and most obvious argument for a robust cloud toolset. The client was successful, ultimately, using the resources that they had, but I guarantee if they were given a way to accelerate ingest, bridge geographic divides, and manage the sheer volume of data in a less expensive manner, they would have done so. So to prepare for this discussion, I ultimately spoke with 7 post-production supervisors, all clients of Tech Postworks, to find out what state their cloud toolset was in now, today, and perhaps sift through how much of the cloud legend and lore was fact and how much of it was fiction. To my great surprise, the degree of cloud usage today is shockingly low. They have all scratched the surface, but none of them have taken a serious plunge. So let's talk about what they are doing today. And they are using cloud toolsets today, just not to the extent that one would expect, considering the amount of material that they're generating and considering the industry trends that we're currently seeing in New York and elsewhere. For documentation storage, all these clients seem to be using a combination of Google Docs, Huddle, Box.com, and other document sharing platforms. For web-based review of video clips, catalogs, cuts, they're using a mixture of A-Frame, Media Silo, Pix, and DAX, and other video sharing platforms. Skype and FaceTime are now the de facto standards for remote auditions and talent scouting, the streaming of which is usually captured and cut down into character reels during the initial story editing process. This is obviously dramatically less expensive than putting a camera crew on an airplane. For sending data, most of our clients are using Hightail, WeTransfer, Aspera, Signient, and the usual suspects. For features in scripted television, VFX Review is a mixture of CineSync, TweakRV, F-Track, Shotgun, Joust, and others. I couldn't find a good logo to represent the visual effects community, so hopefully that's an acceptable representation of visual effects. At this point, we maintain the expectation that meaningful usage of cloud toolsets will increase over time. On occasion, real-world events nudge our clients into thinking more seriously about what other benefits a cloud toolset may have for them, especially when it comes to data storage. These real-world events have resonated with large facilities too, such as our own. During Hurricane Sandy in New York City, the true value of cloud storage, for example, is never clearer to me, specifically to me, than when I received a phone call from that very same client who had just finished shooting 4,300 hours of footage. He was very concerned about meeting his show deadlines, and to this effect, he asked me personally if I could enter the Postworks building in New York, our 106th Avenue location, which by the way was powered off like everything else south of 34th Street, and literally, this is a quote, walk the J-Bod out of the machine room and onto street level so he could drive away with it. I explained this really wasn't possible for a few reasons. First of all, the building was off, like literally off, which meant no life safety systems, no sprinklers or exit signs, nothing. It also meant that our various Unity and ISIS servers in this particular case were equally powered off. And he also didn't fully realize at the time that the conventional model of a SAN, which everybody in this room understands, means that you might be sharing those spindles with other clients, other projects, other jobs. And to give him the JBOD for his project would mean giving him a slice of everyone else's storage. So his request could not be fulfilled in that manner on that day. Certainly, Tech Postworks thought about this too. Shortly after Sandy, we discussed where else our operations could exist, either within the 5 boroughs of New York or externally, so that client data and a meaningful usage of that data could continue in the face of bad times, and that discussion is ongoing. I should note, as an interesting footnote to this story, is that during pre-production of this particular show, we actually offered several different second-tier and third-tier strategies with this kind of scenario in mind. Obviously, we weren't expecting what ultimately happened, but we provided a cautionary tale to this client about the value and the importance of distributing the content to other places that are not physically in the building. The client loved it, absolutely was on board, could not entertain our interest in doing anything like that strictly for reasons of cost containment. So at that time on that day, either the toolset, the cloud toolset specifically, wasn't affordable enough or sophisticated enough to do exactly what they wanted to do, or both. Finally, what does the cloud toolset for those productions look like in the future? There are certainly some key needs that are missing. Capturing more rich metadata right at the lens specifically to minimize logging and tagging downstream. Phonetic audio indexing mechanisms that also run on camera systems and can stream that metadata to cloud capture platforms. Streaming camera proxies to cloud systems, that might be something, by the way, we see a lot of on the show floor this week, that also double as editorial cutting media, so that the media that you edit with is the media that you review and stream too. And the media that you review and you stream is the media that you edit with. That's actually not the paradigm that historically we've seen in New York and elsewhere. Typically, there is a pool of media used for editorial and a separate pool for review and other generations and generations and generations of media, and that's what's taking a lot of time. So the holy grail in that respect is that you have one unified pool of media that can be used for all these things, and of course, it would have to be centralized. And what about the so-called round-trip workflows to have conformed capabilities in cloud systems that permit feeding an EDL or an AAF and doing select polls that are then downloaded to the clientele? To a great extent, we're already seeing that today, especially in the visual effects community for scripted television and feature films. So the hope is that we're going to see some of this week. Incidentally, Avid made some interesting announcements yesterday morning about what their strategies are for cloud and centralizing all that data. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So I think it's an interesting point there, and I want to bring one more point up from the first review we did. The cloud is access, centralized access. The cloud is technology, distributive and redundant. So we're speaking to both points there where we said, you know, as Rami said too, when you have cloud technology, the data can be at different geographic locations, but represented as one object and available to everyone in one centralized access point. That's one of the things we're trying to move toward, and I think this industry will benefit tremendously from that because it is essentially the best of both worlds. Slide up, please. And Mr. Joe Byrne.
So, can I get this mic on?
Is it on?
Can you hear me? Oh, great. So, there are a couple of general opportunities that are offered by the cloud. I did a talk at the HBA Tech Retreat last year when I talked about what would come after data-based workflows. And the obvious and sort of general answer to that is the cloud, but the problem is what the cloud is very ambiguous. And I want to talk now in the spirit of the theme of Josh's panel about what the creative options are and also what the storage implications are for what might follow in sort of the next generation of post workflow. The two things that come up the most often in our discussions of this, and they have to do with this particularly strange edge case that we have because one of the aspects of our business is that we work with these large-scale factual and reality filmmakers, and they tend to generate in quantity what scales in an unusual way. And the two things that have come up specifically are we as an industry, and this goes into into fiction programming, cinema, and scripted TV. We as an industry have made promiscuous copying of client media for the purposes of data integrity into a kind of a religion. And we have this internal conflict because the content security consideration is to do exactly the opposite. And the cloud offers a rule-based, and essentially an algorithm-based opportunity to manage that particular conflict. And what it does is that it essentially is a forcing function. And Amazon even talks about in their literature about S3 that they essentially are using the forcing function of their own business to prove the integrity and the applicability of their model to their clients. And they're saying, we're using it. And we're letting you use it live on our own product, and that's it. We must fulfill what we are offering. The other aspect that is an opportunity that's come up through this technology is the workplace is often the worst place to do work. And one of the things that cloud technology has offered, and one of the things that was initially attractive about it, was the possibility of taking some part of what we do when we collaborate together in making film and television, and doing that in a place other than an office carrel in an office building. And the imaginary image that we always had was of sitting on the mountainside with our laptop, editing our feature film, and that myth was to a large extent was driving the marketing focus on the idea of distributing the creativity. The interesting thing about that is that, in fact, there is, I think, an opportunity to take advantage of something that's happening in another field, which is in education. There's something called a flipped classroom. And the idea there is that kids would do their homework in class, and they would hear essentially the lecture part of it. They would have the curriculum piece, and they would do that at home. And the advantage of that, and this is a proven strategy. The advantage of that is that you are taking advantage of the time that you are able to spend in the hotbed of instructional focus, doing the thing that you're not good at doing, which is your work. And you go out of that into another peaceful place where you can contemplate and you can study, and the technology now allows you to be instructed at your own pace and in terms that are comfortable to you. And I think that there is an application to this very thing in both the creative and also the industrial process of filmmaking. And we've started to see some evidence of the benefit of doing this as well. I think it's not going to be, we have, in the workplace, we have this kind of continuous partial attention problem, which is that that we're constantly being interrupted, but that scrum process that we have of making film and TV now should be susceptible to the same kinds of agile practices that you see coming from the application programming culture, and that that goes back to this conflict that we have about data and data and content security. We want to work in an open, collaborative environment, but we want also for our content to be protected. And I think the single instance of the content managed behind essentially an air gap in a fully secure environment is the key to that.
All right, thank you. So, some questions leading off that. Can we be trusted then, do you feel, if we're in the future, we have a centralized access, we have trusted now that the content, the bits are secure, we have rich metadata, we have software developers that have built what we need to follow our business practices. Can we be trusted to be at our best and creative, third places, wherever on that hill?
I think we have no choice but to do that, and I think that is the paradigm that exists today. I think what's happening now is that we don't necessarily have the tools to do that as fluidly as we might, but I think that we are on the cusp of presenting that. I think that your image of us being in the 1984 moment is very apt. I think we are starting to see that come into place, and that the OpenStack model and the commercial cloud models are offering pretty adequate ways of doing that today.
You mentioned just something right now that's after my own heart, the private cloud and the commercial cloud. I want to do away with, and this is my own mission, please feel free to join me, the concept of public cloud. There is no such thing as a public cloud. It's not public housing. It's not a public utility. It's a private company that built it for private gain, and they lease it to you. So I think when you say public cloud, you get, again, that fear from years of jargon. Oh, it's out in someone else's public. It's the public. It's like a public restroom. No, that's not what your content is. Your content is managed by a team of highly skilled engineers that either went to school or are best in class, and their job is to maintain this. I really do feel that that's a personal campaign. We have to change the terminology with that as well. Well, do you guys have any thoughts or questions regarding?
I mean, on that point, what we're prototyping is something that's utterly private, right? And when you talk about security, I mean, most production is emailing sensitive documents. They're emailing them. Anyone can get their hands on them. People are using Dropbox and Vimeo, and I think, a lot of times those are not considered secure. but they're being used rampantly.
Yeah.
So what we're prototyping is that you would have your own private Dropbox-like thing, right? And then you could discuss with the client the security requirements. So those can be transparent. You can collaborate on what the security requirements are. And I think that's a lot more secure than how production flows now.
Yeah.
I had an interesting experience a few days ago when I did my taxes. So I do my taxes using TurboTax, which one could construe as a cloud tool set. And to my horror, not to my surprise, but to my horror, was literally every tax return I've done in the last 5 years. So when you think about it, the only thing that is protecting that information, which is obviously deeply sensitive and personal to the end user, is literally a user ID and a password. So we currently, probably everybody in this room has their checking account, their tax returns, their savings information, pictures of their cat, behind a user ID and a password. So as Joe said, I think the trust will come. I think the need to contain costs and the need to collaborate in the manner that we've been describing will drive the trust factor.
I just got to say, one of the challenges we're having with security right now is you implement security mechanisms like two-factor authentication. Once the application gets to the hands of the creative, they say, can you turn that off?
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to go through that process. And the people who are instructing us on how to design the application say, you must have that. So that's a much bigger challenge. That's more of a psychological challenge than a technological challenge.
So we have about 10 minutes. We're going to flip it out to some Q&A. I don't know if we have mics out there, but if you yell, I'll try to repeat. Oh, it's a mic right there, and there's one over there. So does anybody have any questions? Thoughts? Do you want us to do a chorus line? No? Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
This is great. My name is Michael Schroeder with Microsoft. As we move to 4K, how does the cloud need to change?
Well, it needs to be able to scale, to infinity and beyond. So quite simply, we're just adding more storage. And we don't know what the end game is. We're just doing it.
We have a customer whose contribution bucket essentially is on S3, and for us it's a 4K UHD episodic program, and it is the most efficient way for us to manage that process, and would have always been to have essentially a server-to-server transaction at the last step. And ironically, this job is being rendered largely in the Amazon cloud. And the final touch will be on our S3 server, and it will simply be peer-to-peer to their S3 server and deliver. So all of the always increasing demands on image quality, frame rate, dynamic range, spatial resolution will always be better serviced by server-to-server communication, because we are becoming more and more physically isolated and we're not creating a physical product.
More of the questions, I understand that the scalability that's sort of built into the concept of the cloud is that it is potentially infinitely scalable depending on how much money you want to throw at it. But the main thing that, as a person who works for Microsoft, we want to understand what is it missing today in the services, in the scale, in the things that it doesn't have that are needed by the media companies and the post-production houses.
I mean, one thing that I don't think I developed enough in my slide is when you look at the metadata that's associated with a particular file, especially from an archivist standpoint, if a file sits on a cloud, let's say no one touches it for 5 years, you could now say, well, maybe I can delete it, right? But there isn't a lot of applications out there that support that kind of decision making. So you just hold on to it, right? And that seems to be unsustainable. So things like metadata, natural language query databases where a non-technical person can type something in and get information back. simplistic things like that.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Over there.
I just had one thing to say, and it's not so much a question, but you may be able to answer your kind of real-world experiences of this. So I work at 20th Century Fox, and one of the problems we have is that we send our cutting rooms all around the world, and quite often we'll send them and we'll set up a room, and we have 2 or 3 weeks lead time if we're lucky, and you need a 6-month lead time to install a decent internet connection with bandwidth enough to get anything more than email in or out. So that's the only issue that we have, because we're thinking a lot about cloud computing and editing in the cloud and Adobe Premiere and all that other stuff, but there seems to be a real practical consideration for the way that we set up movies and where we make movies, and I wonder what your experience of that was.
I mean, the locations where we're prototyping have horrible internet connections, and I think a lot of productions are not necessarily going to spend more money to have a bigger internet line. So you have to somehow utilize the resources that are there. So we make intelligent decisions in terms of how we move the files back and forth. So if you have a traditional internet connection, we'll say, let today's data trickle over, over the next 8 hours, right? So we instantly replicate the data from one location to another. And not that long ago, we had our first experience where we did an online in the cloud. It was kind of like an awe moment. The process was slow. We were going to this other location and retrieving files slowly, but we were doing it, right? So you can foresee, in a few years or so, everything online's, clip pulls, color correction, clearly is going to be in some kind of cloud-based workflow, because it's happening right now, even with really poor internet connections.
We had an interesting experience several years ago where we were providing the editorial services and workflow support for a major motion picture film, $200 million budget, shooting predominantly in Asia and India. And there was some interest in some cloud collaboration methodologies to make it go. And I think the knee-jerk reaction when it comes to the question that the gentleman asked is that the remote locations will struggle the most in providing the bandwidth, and certainly very, very often, or sometimes, at least that can be true. One of the biggest challenges with fulfilling the need was getting a fiber line under the streets of Manhattan in a timely basis just to deliver on time. So it really can take you by surprise when when you actually do need to have high-speed data lines to facilitate these kinds of workflows. The geographies are not always so obvious.
That includes Sylmar, California.
One of the ways that we handled that job was by sort of an asymmetrical strategy, which I think is what Rami is suggesting. We had at the Colo, we had the ability to put large data in and out of the collaboration network, but in the actual cutting room, we were only able to work with proxy media initially, and then we had a sort of slow boat filling in behind strategy. Similar to what Rami had talked about, where we're essentially filling back behind with that. And there are ways to deal with that with dailies workflows as well. But you must continuously feed the network with original data, and with the hope of eventually creating multiple pools of data for data security at geographically separated locations. Which was a necessity anyway, and we're trying to make a virtue of that.
So we've got time for about one question and maybe part of an answer. So you want to go ahead?
Hi. Hello, good morning. François Bourdieu from UQAM in Montreal. Question directed to anybody who wants to answer. What is your asset management software? What are you using? And how were you able to integrate that into the cloud, your cloud system? Maybe more Rami?
Well, we're utilizing NoSQL databases, and we have a team of software developers that essentially are customizing features per the client needs. Our bigger challenge is aggregating assets and metadata from different applications that might not want to give that information up, right? So we see a future where if that happens, by the way, someone mentioned the Avid Open. If I understood correctly, they said they're going to let everything come out of the Avid to a third-party application. That's pretty significant because there's so much rich metadata in there that can go into an asset management database of your choosing, right? The trick is get it in there so that you can do something constructive with it. So, but to answer your question, we develop around a NoSQL database like MongoDB.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm just going to talk on that for a moment. In a lot of the shows we deal with, it's Word documents on index servers. I don't know. It's very unscientific. Logging, a lot of the logging and annotation that goes on is stored in a Word document, put in a central location, and has an index service like Apple Search that goes in there and allows people common places to go look at it. Some cloud tools, but some of them Matt mentioned, but it's all over the place. There is no one, I think, tool to rule them all right now. But I think we're just about out of time. I guess we'll take this opportunity. Please thank the panel and thank you.